The blizzard came out of nowhere. One moment, the quiet little town of Willow Creek was wrapped in the calm of evening snowflakes drifting gently under the orange glow of streetlights. The next, the wind turned wild, screaming through the trees like some angry spirit unleashed. Roads vanished under blankets of white, power lines groaned and snapped, and the world outside became a swirling blur of chaos. In a small, creaky farmhouse on the edge of town, Eleanor Briggs, 76 years old and living alone, sat in her worn rocking chair beside a crackling wood stove. She was the kind of woman everyone in town knew, the one who baked pies for the church fundraiser, who knitted scarves for the local kids each winter, who always smiled even though her hands were marked by age and work. Her late husband, Henry, had built this home with his own two hands back in '63. It had stood through storms before, but tonight felt different. As the wind howled, Eleanor pulled her shawl tighter. She could feel the house shudder. Outside, snow piled higher against the porch. The storm was fierce, relentless. She thought about calling her neighbor, but the phone lines were already down. So she simply whispered a small prayer. Lord, keep anyone out there safe tonight. A few miles down the highway, safety was the last thing 15 men were thinking about. The Hells Angels were on their way back from a charity ride in Denver, an ironic twist for a group with such a rough reputation. They weren't the lawless gang people still whispered about in old newspaper clippings. Most of these men were veterans, mechanics, truckers, men who'd found brotherhood on the road and in the roar of their Harley engines. But reputation had a long shadow. Their leader, a burly man everyone called Bear, could barely see through the blinding snow. His breath fogged inside his helmet. "This ain't good, boys," he shouted over the wind, his voice muffled through the helmet mic. "Visibility's near zero. We need to find cover fast." "Nearest town's 20 minutes back," one of them replied. "Not at this pace," Bear growled. "We'll freeze before that." The snow thickened, coating their bikes in ice, their leathers stiffening with frost. Then, through the whiteout, a faint glow appeared, a farmhouse light, steady and warm. Bear squinted. "There, headlight, 2 o'clock. Follow it?" One by one, the bikes turned off the main road, crunching through the snow-covered path that led up to Eleanor's old house. The engines echoed through the night, deep, rumbling, defiant against the storm. Inside, Eleanor heard it before she saw it, the unmistakable thunder of motorcycles. Her heart skipped. Who on earth would be out riding in weather like this? She rose slowly, her joints protesting, and peered out the frosted window. Through the curtain of snow she saw shadows, large figures, 15 of them, approaching her porch. For a brief moment, fear gripped her chest. She'd read about bikers like these. Tattoos, leather vests, patches that carried names people whispered about in truck stops. Hells Angels. Her first thought was trouble. Then she saw one of them stumble. His knees buckled as if the cold had drained the strength from him. The others rushed to help, their movements clumsy from the frostbite biting at their fingers. They weren't breaking in or yelling. They were just, trying to stay upright. Eleanor's fear turned into something else. Compassion. She opened the door a crack, the wind slamming it against her shoulder. "What are you fellas doing out there? You'll freeze to death." Bear turned toward the voice, snow crusted in his beard. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you. We're just trying to find shelter till this storm eases up. We'll stay out of your way if—" "Oh, nonsense." She interrupted sharply, her voice small but firm. "Get in here before you all turn into icicles. Leave your boots by the door? I just swept this floor this morning." The men exchanged looks. Some grinned. Others hesitated. But Bear gave a nod. "You heard the lady move." The sight was something to behold. 15 rough, frozen bikers crammed into a little farmhouse living room. Steam rising from their leathers as the heat from the stove began to thaw them out. Eleanor moved briskly between them, fetching old quilts and wool blankets from a cedar chest. "Here, wrap yourselves up. I'll put some soup on." "Ma'am, you don't have to," one began. But she shot him a look that silenced him instantly. "I said I'll put some soup on." They sat there awkwardly at first, unsure what to do with their hands. The ticking of the old wall clock filled the silence. Then one of them, a lanky man with a scar on his cheek, cleared his throat. "You live out here alone, ma'am?" Eleanor nodded. "Been that way since my Henry passed, 12 years this spring." The man looked around the cozy room, the framed photographs, the handmade Afghans, the faint smell of cinnamon. "He built this place?" "He did." She smiled faintly. "Every nail, every beam." Bear's eyes softened as he looked at the fireplace mantel, where an old black-and-white photo sat, a young man in uniform with his arm around a smiling woman. "He served?" "Yes, Korea, came back, started a family, built this home." For the first time, the bikers relaxed. They understood that language, service, loyalty, loss. It ran deep in their blood too. Eleanor stirred the pot of soup, humming softly. The smell of chicken and herbs filled the room. When she served it, they ate quietly, their faces thawing, their spirits lifting. One by one, they began to talk about their rides, their families, the long roads they'd seen. Bear sat by the window, watching the storm. "You sure you don't mind us being here, ma'am? We can pay you for the food." Eleanor chuckled softly. "You think I'd take money for helping someone in need?" "Not in this house, son." The word son hit him harder than he expected. It had been years since anyone called him that. As the night deepened, the wind howled, but the farmhouse felt like an island of warmth. One biker pulled out a harmonica. Another found an old Bible on the shelf and began reading a passage aloud, his rough voice trembling slightly as he spoke about mercy and kindness. By midnight, the storm showed no sign of stopping. Eleanor insisted they stay the night. "You boys can sleep wherever there's room. Couch, floor, doesn't matter. The storm's got no manners, we'll just have to make do." Bear smiled. "Yes, ma'am." When the morning came, the world was buried in silence. The snow stretched for miles, glittering under the pale sun. The bikers stepped outside, brushing frost off their bikes. The engines coughed but didn't start. The gas lines were frozen solid. Eleanor brought them coffee in mismatched mugs. "Looks like you're staying for breakfast too," she said with a wink. The men laughed, and the sound filled the cold air like a promise that not all things hard and rough stay that way. They spent the morning helping her shovel snow, patch a broken fence, and fix the sputtering generator. It wasn't long before the old farmhouse looked a little brighter, like it had absorbed the warmth of every hand that helped. When it was finally time to go, Bear lingered on the porch. "Ma'am," he said softly, "you didn't have to do what you did. Most folks wouldn't even open the door to us." Eleanor looked him in the eye. "Well, maybe most folks forgot what being human means." "You looked cold, hungry, and lost." "I didn't see bikers." "I saw people." Bear's throat tightened. He nodded slowly. "You got a good heart, Miss Briggs." She smiled. "You just remember to pass it on, son." He held out his hand. She took it, small, fragile, but strong. As they rode off into the distance, engines rumbling in unison, Eleanor watched from her porch until they disappeared over the hill. She thought that was the end of it, but it wasn't. The next morning, just as she was pouring herself a cup of tea, she heard it, faint at first, then growing louder. The unmistakable sound of motorcycles. Not one, not 15, dozens, maybe 100. She stepped out onto her porch, shielding her eyes from the morning sun, and there they were, a long, gleaming line of chrome and leather stretching down the road, 100 Hell's Angels, engines idling like the heartbeat of thunder. Eleanor's teacup slipped from her hand and shattered on the porch. Bear was at the front, helmet tucked under his arm, his face solemn. "Morning, ma'am," he called out. "We figured you could use a little help around here." She blinked, stunned. "A little help?" He grinned. "Let's just say word got around. You helped our brothers. Now our family helps you." And as the engines roared to life again, Eleanor realized that kindness, no matter how small, always comes back around in ways you could never expect. For a long moment, Eleanor just stood there on her porch, her breath misting in the cold morning air, staring at the sea of motorcycles that stretched as far as her eyes could see. Chrome glinted under the winter sun. Black leather jackets flashed with red and white patches, each one marked with the same wings she'd seen the night before. But this was something entirely different. The rumble of 100 engines filled the valley like a storm of sound, deep and steady, powerful yet strangely comforting. It wasn't a roar of menace, it was a declaration of respect. Bear swung a leg off his bike and walked up the path, his heavy boots crunching on the frost. Behind him, a few bikers carried boxes, tools, and lumber in their arms. Eleanor's voice trembled when she finally spoke. "What on earth are you all doing here?" Bear smiled faintly. "You took care of my men when nobody else would. You didn't ask who we were. You didn't ask what we'd done. You just opened your door. Now it's our turn to open ours for you." "I don't need anything," she said softly, though the truth was that she did. The roof leaked in 3 places. Her fence leaned like an old man on a cane. Her firewood was running low, and she'd been rationing food for weeks. But she wasn't the kind to ask for help. Never had been. Bear nodded knowingly, as if he could read the thoughts she didn't say. "Maybe you don't need it," he said gently, "but you sure as hell deserve it." The engines shut off one by one, and the sudden silence felt almost sacred. The only sound left was the crunch of boots and the clatter of tools. Then came the laughter, rough, loud, and full of life. Eleanor watched in stunned awe as bikers began to move around her property like a small army of kindness. One group started clearing the driveway, others hauled lumber toward the barn. Someone was already on the roof, hammering at loose shingles. A few men unloaded groceries, bags upon bags of food, canned goods, fresh bread, coffee, even a few pies from the local diner. "Good heavens," she murmured, shaking her head. "You all didn't have to do this." A tall, quiet biker named Tank smiled at her. "Ma'am, you gave 15 frozen idiots a warm place to live last night. If that doesn't earn you an army, I don't know what does." The day unfolded like a dream. By noon, the whole property was alive with motion. The air was thick with the smell of gasoline, sawdust, and coffee. Someone had built a bonfire out front, where a few bikers huddled, warming their hands. Another crew worked to mend her sagging fence, laughing and telling road stories that made her chuckle despite herself. Eleanor brought out trays of cocoa and sandwiches, shaking her head as she watched them. "You boys eat like you've never seen food before." "Can't help it, ma'am," one grinned. "Riding burns calories." Bear stayed close, directing crews with a calm authority that came from years of leadership. Every time Eleanor tried to thank him, he waved her off. "You already did your part, ma'am. Now it's our turn." By mid-afternoon, the old farmhouse looked years younger. The porch steps were repaired, the roof patched, the barn doors rehung. Someone even replaced the flickering porch light that had long since given up. As she stood watching, Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. The same men who the world had labeled as dangerous outcasts and thugs were now the very image of loyalty and gratitude. At one point, she found Bear in the yard, cutting a stack of firewood with practiced efficiency. "You really don't have to go this far," she said again, her voice thick with emotion. He paused, wiping his brow with a gloved hand. "Ma'am, years back I used to think kindness was weakness. I thought the world didn't give you anything unless you took it. But last night," he shook his head slowly, "you proved me wrong. You reminded me what strength really looks like." Eleanor smiled, her eyes glistening. "Oh, son, strength isn't about how hard you hit. It's about how soft your heart can stay in a hard world." Bear's eyes dropped to the ground, his jaw tight. "I guess I needed to hear that." The hours passed and the sun dipped lower in the sky. The snow sparkled, melting in patches where boots and bike tires had chewed through it. When the last nail was hammered, the last board set, and the last shovel of snow tossed aside, the bikers gathered in front of the house. Lined up in neat rows like a regiment standing at attention. Bear stepped forward. "We're about done here, ma'am. House is tighter than a drum. You've got enough firewood and food to last the season. But before we go—" He turned and gave a nod. One of the bikers walked up, carrying something wrapped in cloth. When he unrolled it, Eleanor gasped. It was a handcrafted wooden sign, smooth and polished, carved with her name, Briggs Homestead, the House of Angels. Her hands trembled as she reached out to touch it. "Oh, it's from all of us," Bear said quietly. "A reminder that family doesn't always come by blood. Sometimes it comes roaring down your driveway on two wheels." The men chuckled softly, but their eyes were shining two dots. She blinked back tears. "You boys are something else." Bear smiled. "Nah, ma'am. You're the something else. We're just paying it forward." Eleanor insisted on feeding them one more meal before they left. She cooked up a pot of stew, and the old house was soon filled with laughter and warmth once again. She moved among them like a grandmother fussing over her grandsons, making sure they ate enough, scolding anyone who tried to sneak out without seconds. When the meal was over, Bear stood and raised his glass. "To Miss Eleanor Briggs," he said, his voice loud and proud, "for showing a bunch of rough riders what real strength looks like." "To Miss Briggs." The bikers roared back in unison, raising their cups. The cheer echoed through the house, bouncing off the wooden beams, out the windows, and into the cold air beyond. When it was finally time to go, they filed out one by one, shaking her hand, some even hugging her gently before climbing back on their bikes. The engines came alive again, a symphony of thunder that filled the valley, but Bear lingered. He looked back one last time at the small woman standing on her porch, the same porch where they had nearly frozen to death just a day before. "You ever need anything, ma'am?" he said solemnly. "You just call this number." He handed her a small card, plain white, with nothing but a phone number scrawled in black ink. She looked down at it. "What's this?" He smiled. "Let's just say it's a lifetime warranty for kindness. You ever in trouble, you call that. Doesn't matter where you are or what time it is. One of us will answer." Eleanor chuckled softly. "Oh, I doubt I'll ever need to use that." Bear's eyes softened. "Maybe not, but it's good to know someone's got your back." She nodded, clutching the card like it was gold. "You take care of yourselves out there. Roads can be cruel." He nodded back. "So can people, but not all of them." The engines revved, and one by one the angels began to roll out, their bikes forming a long procession that disappeared into the horizon. Eleanor watched them go until all she could hear was the fading echo of loyalty written in exhaust and steel. When the last bike vanished over the ridge, the quiet returned. The wind whispered through the trees, and for the first time in years, the old house didn't feel lonely that night as she sat by the fire with a cup of tea. She gazed at the new wooden sign that hung proudly above her door. The House of Angels. She thought of Henry, her late husband, and smiled softly. "You'd have liked them, Henry," she whispered. "Tough on the outside, soft on the inside, just like you." The fire crackled, and outside the snow continued to fall, not with fury this time, but with peace. For Eleanor, it was just another winter night. But for the Hells Angels, something had changed. In the weeks that followed, word of the House of Angels spread far beyond Willow Creek. Riders talked about the old lady who had opened her home to them when the world might have turned them away, and for those who'd been there, it became more than a story. It became a symbol, a reminder that kindness could still exist in a world that had forgotten it. Winter turned to spring, and the snow that had once buried the Briggs farmhouse melted away, revealing green shoots pushing stubbornly through the thawing earth. The fence gleamed with new paint, the roof no longer leaked, and a new sign still hung proudly above the door. The House of Angels. Eleanor Briggs moved a little slower these days. Her knees ached when the rain came, and her hands trembled slightly when she poured her tea. But her heart had never felt younger. Sometimes she'd sit on that porch, knitting a scarf or watching the road that wound past her house, half expecting to hear the distant growl of engines. Some days she did. A lone rider would appear now and then, a familiar leather vest flashing the red and white. They always stopped, always brought something small, a bag of groceries, a bunch of daisies, a few logs for her woodpile. "Family looks out for family," they'd say before roaring off again. The whole town of Willow Creek had taken notice. People who once crossed the street when bikers rolled into the diner now greeted them with nods and smiles. The Hells Angels who came through town didn't stir up trouble. They filled gas tanks, fixed fences, helped old folks with groceries. It was strange how one act of kindness could ripple outward, changing how the world saw an entire group, but seasons have a way of testing. The bonds we think are unbreakable. By late summer, Eleanor wasn't feeling quite herself. The heat exhausted her. Her breath grew shorter, and she found herself resting more often. She brushed it off as age. Old engines just running low on oil, she joked to herself. But one morning, when she failed to show up at the church bake sale, her neighbor, Mrs. Dunbar, came knocking. She found Eleanor slumped in her rocker, pale but breathing. The ambulance came fast. Willow Creek was small, but its people cared for their own. That evening, the news traveled faster than wildfire. By dawn, the Angels knew. Bear was in Nevada when he got the call. He didn't wait for explanations. He just threw on his vest, fired up his bike, and hit the road. Word spread through the chapters like it was carried by the wind itself. By nightfall, the highways were alive with thunder again. When the nurses at St. Mary's Hospital looked out the window the next morning, they froze. The parking lot was filled, every space and stretch of curb taken, rows upon rows of Harleys gleaming in the sun. Bikers lined the sidewalks, silent, standing at attention. Inside, Eleanor stirred awake, her vision hazy. She blinked, confused at first by the flowers that crowded every surface, bouquets of wildflowers. Roses, even daisies tied together with leather straps instead of ribbons. A nurse smiled gently. "Looks like you've got visitors." Eleanor's eyes widened when the door opened and Bear stepped in, holding his helmet in one hand and a vase of fresh lilac in the other. He looked too big for the room, his leather jacket creaking as he moved closer to her bed. "Well, I'll be—" she whispered, her voice weak but full of warmth. "If it isn't my angels." Bear grinned. "You scared us, ma'am. We don't take kindly to folks making us worry." "I didn't mean to," she said softly. "I just got a little tired." He set the vase down beside her bed, then took her hand gently, a hand so small and frail compared to his, yet somehow stronger than steel. "You gave us a home when the world shut its doors. You think we're gonna let you fight this alone?" Her eyes filled with tears. "You boys have your own lives to live." He shook his head. "You are our life, ma'am. Every one of us out there owes you more than we can say. You didn't just give us shelter, you gave us something we didn't even know we were missing. Family." The nurse peeked in again, her expression a mix of awe and disbelief. "Excuse me, sir, but there are a lot of you out there. Maybe you could let a few in at a time?" Bear smiled. "You heard the lady?" he said into his headset radio. "2 at a time." For the next several hours, the hospital room became a revolving door of leather, tattoos, laughter, and tears. Big men with calloused hands brought flowers, letters, and handmade cards. One of them, a tall biker named Mick, set a little model Harley on her knitstand. "Built it myself," he said gruffly. "Didn't know if you like bikes, but figured you might like this one." Eleanor chuckled softly. "It's beautiful, dear." Each visitor left a mark, a story, a joke, a prayer. The nurses had never seen anything like it. Even the doctors stood at the door, watching in quiet respect as the toughest men they'd ever seen spoke in whispers and wiped tears when they thought no one noticed. For days, they stayed close. They took turns sitting in the waiting room. They brought meals to the staff, donated blood, fixed the hospital's broken outdoor bench, and even repainted the parking lot lines. No one asked them to. They just did, and slowly Eleanor began to recover. The color returned to her cheeks. The sparkle came back to her eyes. When she was finally strong enough to go home, Bear and his men were waiting. They didn't let the ambulance take her. Instead, they rolled out something else. A sidecar, freshly painted white, padded with soft blankets and cushions. Bear stood proudly beside it. "Your chariot awaits, Miss Briggs," he said with a grin. Eleanor laughed, a sound so pure it made even the hardest of men smile. "Oh, you ridiculous boys. You're going to give the whole town something to talk about." Bear winked. "Good. They ought to talk about something worth remembering." The engines roared to life. and as the convoy rolled out of the hospital parking lot, the people of Willow Creek came out to watch. Some filmed on their phones, others just stood with hands over hearts. A sea of black leather and chrome escorted one tiny, white-haired woman down Main Street, the kind of sight that would live in the town's memory forever when they reached her farmhouse. Eleanor's porch was decorated with fresh flowers and a brand-new porch swing. She smiled through tears. "You boys never stop, do you?" Bear grinned. "Can't stop. Not till the job's done." The angels helped her inside, careful and gentle as if she were made of glass. But the sparkle in her eyes told them she was far from fragile. That evening, the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gold. The bikers built a bonfire in her yard. Eleanor sat wrapped in a quilt on the porch, watching as they laughed, played guitar, and told stories. The air smelled like wood smoke and coffee. For the first time in a long time, she felt completely, utterly alive. She looked at Bear, who sat quietly nearby. "You know," she said softly, "people always think they have to do something grand to make a difference. But sometimes all it takes is a warm house and a little soup." He smiled, nodding slowly. "You're right. And sometimes all it takes to change a man's heart is someone who sees past the leather and the noise." Eleanor's gaze drifted toward the horizon. "Promise me something, Bear? Anything. When I'm gone someday, and don't you look so sad, it happens to everyone, you make sure this place stays standing. Not for me, but for what it means. A place where no one gets turned away. Promise me that." Bear swallowed hard. "You have my word, ma'am." She nodded, satisfied, and looked up at the stars. "Good, then I can rest easy." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Around them, laughter rose like music, the sound of engines mixed with the hum of cicadas. In that moment, the old woman and the biker understood something that no sermon or scripture could teach, that love wears many faces. And family can be found in the most unexpected of places. The night deepened, and one by one the bikers fell quiet. When the fire burned low, they covered it with snow and said their goodbyes. But before he left, Bear turned back and looked at her porch, bathed in the soft light of the lanterns. "You ever need anything, ma'am?" She smiled knowingly. "I've got your number, remember?" He chuckled. "Yeah, guess you do." And with that, the angels rode off into the night once more, the thunder of their engines echoing like a heartbeat in the valley. Inside, Eleanor sat in her rocking chair, the warmth of the evening still lingering in her chest. She looked at the wooden sign above her door, the House of Angels, and whispered, "Thank you, boys." The wind outside carried her words into the darkness, where they mingled with the fading sound of motorcycles, a hymn of loyalty, love, and gratitude. Years passed. The seasons rolled over the hills of Willow Creek like pages turning in a book, spring blooms, golden summers, quiet winters, and through them all, the little farmhouse on the edge of town stood firm, its wooden sign weathered but proud, the House of Angels. The road outside changed. Cars came and went, new houses rose in the valley, but that old home remained exactly as it had always been, humble, warm, and full of life. Eleanor Briggs lived to see her 84th year. She grew slower, gentler, softer, but the fire in her eyes never dimmed. The bikers still came, though not always all at once. Sometimes a lone rider would pull in just to mow her lawn. Sometimes a pair would show up with groceries or to patch the roof, or just to share coffee and listen to her stories. The people of Willow Creek had stopped calling them the bikers. Now they called them Eleanor's boys, and she loved them like sons, but life has a way of reminding us that even the brightest fires eventually fade. One cold morning, Bear arrived at the farmhouse with a small bag of tools. He'd been on the road for weeks, helping a new chapter open down south. He wanted to surprise her, maybe fix the back porch railing she'd mentioned last spring. But when he pulled up, something felt different. The curtains were drawn. The porch light was off. No smoke rose from the chimney. He knocked softly. "Miss Briggs?" No answer. He called her name again, louder this time. Then he heard it, the faint creak of the rocking chair inside. He tried the door. It opened easily. She was there, sitting by the fire, her favorite quilt draped over her lap. Her hands were folded neatly, her head tilted slightly as if she'd just fallen asleep. The fire had burned low, glowing embers casting soft light across her face. There was no fear, no pain, just peace. Bear stood there for a long time, frozen. Then he took off his hat and bowed his head. "Rest easy, ma'am," he whispered. "You kept your promise. Now it's our turn." The funeral was small, but the crowd outside was not. The church couldn't hold them all. They came from every chapter, every state. Hundreds of bikers lined the roads of Willow Creek, a river of chrome and leather stretching for miles. The townspeople stood silently on the sidewalks, some with tears in their eyes as the procession rolled by. There was no roaring, no chaos, just the deep, rhythmic pulse of engines running low, a sound that felt more like a heartbeat than noise. At the front rode Bear, carrying a small urn. Behind him, the angels rode 2 by 2, each one wearing a strip of white cloth tied to their handlebars, a symbol of respect, purity, and peace. They buried her beneath the oak tree behind the farmhouse, beside the husband she'd loved all her life. The air was still, the sky overcast, and the only sound was the wind whispering through the branches. When the last word of prayer was spoken, Bear stepped forward. He cleared his throat, but his voice cracked anyway. "Miss Briggs wasn't just a kind old lady," he began. "She was proof that goodness still exists in this world. She saw us for what we could be, not what the world said we were. And because of her, we started to believe it too." He paused, looking down at the urn, his eyes glistening. "We ride for a lot of things, for freedom, for brotherhood, for the open road. But from now on, every ride we take, we ride for her." He reached into his jacket and pulled out something small, the same hand-carved wooden sign they'd once hung on her porch. It had weathered the years, but the words were still clear. "The House of Angels." Bear set it gently against the headstone. "This house was her gift to us. So wherever we go, we'll carry it with us." He stepped back, and for a long moment no one moved. Then, one by one, the bikers removed their helmets. Hundreds of them stood in silence, heads bowed, engines still running low, a chorus of thunder humming softly through the valley like a final lullaby. And then, as if on cue, the engines roared to life. All at once, a sound so powerful it shook the air and brought tears to every face in the crowd. They called it the Angels' Salute. The townsfolk said the sound rolled over the hills for miles. That day, a sound of love, not rebellion, of loyalty, not rage. When it faded, Bear stayed behind. He sat by her grave as the sun broke through the clouds, painting the world in gold. The wind carried the faint scent of lilacs, her favorite. He smiled faintly. "You kept your word, ma'am. And so will we." Over the next few years, the Angels turned Eleanor's farmhouse into something remarkable. They rebuilt it from the ground up, keeping every board and beam that could still stand. They repainted it, repaired it, and filled it with life again, above the porch. They hung the sign once more. "The House of Angels," but this time it wasn't just a name. It was a promise. The house became a shelter, not for bikers, but for anyone who needed it. Travelers, veterans, single mothers, lost souls, anyone down on their luck found a warm bed, a meal, and a place to rest under its roof. The Angels took turns running it. They fixed what broke, cooked for whoever showed up, and told Eleanor's story to everyone who crossed the threshold. A plaque on the wall read, "In memory of Eleanor Briggs, who opened her door and changed the world." And in a way, she had because kindness spreads. It doesn't stop where it begins. It ripples outward, through time, through lives, through generations. Years later, a young man stood in front of that house, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He'd been on the run from bad choices, bad company, a bad life. When he knocked on the door, an older biker with gray in his beard opened it. "You lost, son?" The man asked. The boy hesitated. I just needed a place to crash. I heard you help people here." The biker nodded. "You heard right. Come on in. But before you do, you should know this isn't just a house. It's a promise." You walk through that door, you leave your anger outside. The boy nodded. I can do that. Inside, the air smelled like wood smoke and cinnamon. On the wall, above the fireplace, hung a faded photograph of a smiling old woman with white hair and kind eyes. Who's that? The boy asked. The old biker smiled. That's Miss Briggs. She's the reason we're here. The boy looked at the photo for a long time, then at the plaque beneath it. He read the words aloud. In memory of Eleanor Briggs, who opened her door and changed the world. The old biker nodded. Yeah, she did. That night, as the boy lay in a warm bed for the first time in weeks, he couldn't stop thinking about that photo. About how a single act, a door opened during a storm, could echo through so many lives. Outside, the wind began to rise. Snow fell softly, covering the world in white. And out on the road, faint and distant, came the low, steady rumble of motorcycles moving through the night. Guardians of a legacy born from one woman's kindness. The world would forget her name someday. Time always does that. But her spirit lived on, in the sound of engines, in the warmth of open doors, in the hearts of men who once thought they had none, and somewhere, maybe in the gentle rustle of the trees or the glow of the farmhouse light, if you listened closely, you could almost hear her voice. Be kind, she'd whisper. It costs nothing. And it can change everything.